Good afternoon, and welcome to the Jewish Policy Center webinar. I am Shoshana Bryant, Senior Director of the JPC, and your host. There are a lot of you with us today. That's great. Keep sending that invitation to your friends. So I told you at the beginning of Israel's war against Hamas, we are not doing battlefield analysis. There are plenty of places that do that, and you should pay attention to them. But our goal is to bring a broader framework to events in the region, not only in Israel, but across the Middle East and beyond the Middle East. So we have talked about strategy and policy and regional politics. We have talked about the American administration, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. We've talked about how Israel got to October 6th and how it navigated after October 7th and its plans for the future insofar as we can know them. We do know, as John Spencer, chair of the Modern Urban Warfare Center at West Point, says, that Israel has actually set a standard for the protection of civilians in urban warfare that no one in the future is likely to be able to meet or surpass. But we haven't really talked about how Israel does it. We haven't talked about what Israel does on the battlefield and how those Israeli lessons from the Gaza war will inform not only Israel's future, but decisions of Israel's allies and friends, including America. Israel has an enormous and impressive military technological capability and the ability to evolve on the battlefield. We have seen that. Today's guest, Simone Ledeen, is going to talk about Israel defense capabilities and lessons that have already been learned in Gaza. But first, your JPC commercial. The Jewish Policy Center is a 501c3 organization founded in 1985 to provide perspectives on foreign policy and domestic policy by leading scholars, academics, and commentators. We support a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, especially now, and missile defense. As an organization that sits slightly to the right of center, the JPC advocates for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. Sometimes we think we're losing, but we're going to keep fighting for it. You can find all of our work on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. You can read and sign up for our Insight articles and our magazine, In Focus Quarterly. The summer issue of In Focus is what we call the domestic issue. It's up there now. You will find, however, in a domestic issue that a lot of the subjects look domestic, but have foreign policy implications. That's jewishpolicycenter.org. We hope you'll go there. Right now, our priority at the JPC is to support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them, including the UN and parts of our own government. We absolutely support the right and authority of the democratically elected government of Israel to determine the strategy and tactics of the IDF in its war to defeat Hamas. Our guest today, Simone Ledeen, is a leader in defense policy and national security with extensive experience in intelligence, counterterrorism, and emerging technology. As Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, she navigated complex geopolitical challenges, including those related to China's rise. We're not doing China today, but we may come back and have her do it again. Her private sector work includes a key role at Standard Chartered Bank, launching a comprehensive financial crime compliance program that covered Africa and the Middle East. With foundational experiences in government, including deployments as a civilian in Afghanistan and Iraq, Simone's work continues to shape the national security through advisory and consulting roles and defense technology investment. Simone Ledeen, welcome to the JPC. And I'm going to start you with a question someone sent us based on your article in Real Clear Defense, which, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, is posted on our website. You wrote about tunnel warfare. So the question is, what are the major military lessons Israel has learned about underground warfare since October 7th? And how has the Israeli government's perception, or other people's perception, of what threats tunnels pose changed since October 7th? Simone, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Shoshana, and thanks to everyone who tuned in today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss these issues with you. So with respect to tunnel warfare specifically, and I have to say that did get a lot of attention in my article. A lot of people commented after the article that they weren't aware that it was quite so important. But it has been covered extensively in the news. I think number one, one of the important lessons here is that the sheer scale and scope of the tunnels that Hamas was able to build under Gaza was vastly underestimated by the Israelis and the IDF. And it was only once they actually went in and started investigating was when they realized how extensive this tunnel network really was. So I think first and foremost, we have to recognize that. While I don't think it was a secret that Hamas was using a lot of construction equipment and materials to build tunnels, again, the size and scope really shocked the Israelis once they entered. That's number one. Number two, because of this size and scope, and because of the tunnel environment, which is incredibly, obviously very claustrophobic, very close, also incredibly humid and obviously dark. These are different conditions for fighting than ground forces are used to. And also, these are different conditions that normal ground forces would train for. So Israel very quickly adapted. And while they had a small force that had been trained to fight in tunnels, there's a bigger force now that not only has been trained to fight in tunnels, but has actual experience fighting under those conditions. And I had the opportunity on my last visit to Israel to enter one of the training tunnels, which is, of course, much safer and much cleaner. And I was told a bit brighter than the actual tunnels in Gaza. And I was very eager to exit the tunnels. I will also say that on the technology side, a lot of really interesting and exciting new technology is being developed to help the soldiers and the ground forces who have to operate there. So obviously, they have a big canine force. So they have soldiers that work with dogs, and they can send the dogs in, and the dogs, in many cases, obviously they're smaller, so they can enter smaller spaces. It's obviously safer for the soldiers to send dogs in first to kind of check out what's going on. And unfortunately, a lot of dogs have been killed that way, but better, a dog than a soldier. And also, they've been building different technical capabilities like drones, but drones that can operate underground, drones, and that's a specific capability because the communication system, you can't use Wi-Fi in a tunnel way down under the ground. So there's obviously things that have been created to adapt to that. And also, I've seen quad robots, for example, small, I don't know, you could call them dog robots. They're quad robots, or where quadrupeds, where they have 4 legs. And some of them are small, they're lightweight, they're able to operate in these tunnels, and they can be eyes and ears for some of the ground forces that are operating them. So another point I want to make is that Gaza is not the only place where we see tunnels. I think tunnel warfare is a lot more diffuse than people think or will be. For example, and I mentioned this in my article as well, the Russians have been using tunnels in Ukraine. They've been, in some cases, actually neutralizing the effectiveness of Western weapons that have been sold to or given to Ukraine. And so it's allowed Russia, this is an old tactic, but building these tunnels has allowed Russia to gain an advantage in several areas. because by use of this technique and by use of by the use of tunnels. So anyway, perhaps a good place to start the conversation, but tunnels are important. I think they're going to be increasingly important as we look up north to Lebanon. For sure, Hezbollah has built many underground facilities, and we also should consider that the partners, if you will, that helped Hamas to build the tunnels have been also very close partners with Hezbollah. Of course, this is the Iranian regime, and China in some cases as well. So this is a problem that is growing and is not diminishing. And for the good guys to be creating solutions that we can share is increasingly helpful and important.
So I was making myself a note here because we said we weren't going to talk about China, but I am going to ask you now because you just said that China is helping. Is it helping Hezbollah build tunnels? Is it providing tech? What is China doing in this regard specifically? I hadn't known that they were.
Well, there is some reporting in the media, and this is really the only information that I have on this, but there was an article, I think it was by Ira Stoll. I think it came out just a few weeks ago, where he talked about how the IDF captured 2 Chinese engineers inside one of the tunnels in Gaza. And this was according to I think a US military officer or former military officer, that I think he made this claim during a webinar. So take that for what you will. But if that's the case, if there were actually 2 PLA engineers that were found in the tunnels, yes, that is quite significant. And also, once again, should be red flashing light for the United States that, of course, the PLA, if they're involved in this, and I personally does not surprise me that they would be, they are learning important lessons from that they are taking to use in a potential Taiwan situation. So that's something that, once again, this is not just Israel versus Hamas. This is a Western civilizational conflict, and we need to be completely aligned and allied to kind of face these forces together.
Yeah, and we do know that the Chinese have enhanced their relationships with Iran and with the Houthis. And so we see it as a multinational problem, not just an Israel problem and not just an Israel-Hamas problem. One would hope the US would see it the same way. And that leads to a question. You were a great proponent of moving Israel from EUCOM to CENTCOM when you were in the government, and putting some of America's capabilities in a place to help Israel and Israel's capabilities to help the United States. And it seems to me that first of all, that you were right, that relationship grew very nicely. But how has it worked since October 7th? Are we still cooperating with Israel in the Red Sea? Are we still on the same side?
So thanks for highlighting the Israel's move to CENTCOM, or our moving Israel out of EUCOM and into CENTCOM. We thought that was an incredibly important, significant move. Number one, because Israel was part of EUCOM in a pre-Abraham Accords world, where because of the Arab League ban, there were no countries in the region outside of the half-hearted, Egypt and Jordan, that have really recognized the state of Israel. And so it was the European countries that obviously had recognized the state of Israel. And so in a military context, there was a lot of, training and joint exercises. And that's, the different U.S. combatant commands organize these different exercises with regional partners in order to do a variety of different things, test things, send messages to enemies. And, there are a variety of reasons for these exercises, depending on where they are and what they are. So by moving CENTCOM out of EUCOM into CENTCOM, what it did was really brought out into the open the relationship of Israel with its neighbors, and the relationship to its neighbors. So now we have exercises in the Middle East, and Red Sea inclusive, where the Israeli Navy and the Saudi Navy are actually coordinating on things. Not, it's not out in the open, but it's not, it's not that quiet either. So it's really been quite significant. Certainly could not have happened prior to the Abraham Accords. But once the Abraham Accords were signed, we moved really quickly to get this codified, because it no longer made sense to keep Israel in EUCOM. And I think given the fact that most of the countries in the region share a fear of and deep apprehension towards the Iranian regime, and they also have a deep understanding of Israel's military capabilities, they wanted access to this technology that Israel is creating on many levels, on the defense and national security side. That's the partner they wanted. And so now they've got that partner. And for the US in the region, it also allows us a lot more freedom, because we can rely on Israel to provide things that we perhaps need to focus in the Indo-Pacific in the near future.
But that assumes that the US and Israel continue to see eye to eye on the defense requirements of the region. Do you see, since October 7th, a rift between the United States and Israel that might make it more difficult for Israel in CENTCOM? Do you think that maybe the Arab states could lose some confidence? Part of the confidence that they had in Israel as an ally against Iran, it seems to me, was the idea that the US was behind Israel as well. If there's a rift between us and Israel, what are the Arabs going to think about it?
Well, I think so this is obviously just my personal opinion, but I think the rift is between the Biden administration and Israel, not the United States and Israel, if we can make that distinction. I think that a lot of the actions that the Biden administration has taken to block or hold munitions and other military articles from Israel is really unprecedented. And so I think it's important to note that. Does it bode ill for the future of the US-Israel relationship? I think it certainly awakened Israel to the fact that it could be more independent. It could be, in terms of, it could do more to be less reliant on the United States, and make its own stuff, for lack of a better term. But the United States loses too, because the United States is such a short-sighted policy, I think, and why I am long-term optimistic about the US-Israel relationship, because it doesn't make sense to take this position with respect to Israel from the perspective of the United States. We need them. Like, for example, the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome obviously has been wildly successful, and it took us many years to get the Israelis to agree to a co-production, which involved them sharing the IP for the Iron Dome, which is something I think we're the only country in the world that they share that IP with, and rightly so. I know a lot of countries want to buy the Iron Dome, but the Israelis need to protect that technology, of course. So I think that just using the Iron Dome as an example, we have so much to gain from Israeli tech innovations and all of these things that they're building now. They're coming, already battle tested. I mean, that from the perspective of an investor, I mean, what a phenomenal selling point for anything. Like, yes, this has been, although it's small, although we only have 3 of them, it's already been battle tested, and these units want 10,000 more or whatever it is. So I think that just going back to my original point, I believe it's this administration that has taken this tack, and I think it also has to do with some of the specific staffers that they have in the White House and in some parts of the government, the State Department as well, who come from a really anti-Israel background, be they Palestinian or Iranian, and I think what we're seeing is that personnel is policy, and that has been playing out on the world stage. The other point I wanted to make as to why this policy is so harmful is historically the United States and Israel have been completely in lockstep with each other, and allies are looking with serious trepidation at what the United States has been doing to Israel in terms of placing holds or blocks on certain important technology, certain types of artillery and munitions that Israel needs, not only now but in the future, in a future conflict, unfortunately, in the north. And it's sending a chill through everybody. I mean, there's so many examples now of what this administration has done to its partners, supposed partners, starting in Afghanistan. And you could look at this as another chapter in the same sad story, but it is significant, and it does damage the US on the world stage. And for all these reasons, it's not in our country's interest to continue with this policy. So my hope is that once there's a new administration, they will take a fresh look at this and realize this is not in our interest.
And if there is a new administration, what do you think the chief priorities ought to be in terms of reassuring our allies? Do you have some idea of what a new administration could do to start to patch things up?
Well, I think there are a few things that a new administration could do to patch things up. I think a state visit would be a good start. I think there are public messages that just need to start before. I mean, yes, there have to be a lot of quiet policy conversations, but I think there needs to be like big public messaging as well. So a new administration would send a signal right from the very beginning. We're not part of what happened before. We're doing things differently, and really some form of very public embrace of Israel, I think, is right off the bat warranted and would be very important.
And maybe we should look to our own defense spending at the same time. Yes, we're slow walking some things to Israel, and that is political, but it's also that we don't really have what we need for ourselves. We have given, for example, to Ukraine, all the Stinger missiles that we have. So we went to buy more, and we were told, well, we have to reopen the factory lines. We have to hire people, and we have to reorganize, because the US has not been taking care of its own defense needs. And it seems to me that that would be probably a good thing for us to do, that would help people feel better and also make us more secure. So we have a question here from a listener about Qatar. And I know that you are very familiar with the Gulf states and how they operate and how they do things. The question here is, how does Qatar complicate Israel's participation in CENTCOM, and how does Qatar complicate Israel's participation in potential ceasefire talks with Hamas? What's the role of Qatar?
Qatar, so I guess 2 points. Number one, just to react to what you your last comment about stingers. I think I'm very enthusiastic about this effort to build and open new factories. There's this reindustrialized movement in the US right now that is gaining steam and gaining traction, especially in the defense circles. And so I think there's a massive effort to do that. Although these factories, it takes years to build, and obviously we live in a country that is mired in regulatory nonsense, and so we also have to have politicians that have the will to make these things happen. But there is within the community a very serious intention to reindustrialize in America. So, and another point I want to make is the stingers are now, they're back, but that's because the last few years, the world has used up its stock of artillery ammunition. Like, we're out, and there are new factories that have started producing in the United States, in Texas. I know that Elbit has announced that they're building a factory for 155 millimeter artillery shells in Israel. That's great. Again, those factories take years to stand up. And then all the different materials that you need that go into these things. It's very complicated, obviously, and technical, and you have to source materials from all over the world. So it's not, you can't just push a button and you start producing these things from one day to the next. And I think we got very lazy, and we outsourced too much. And now the chickens have come home to roost, as they say. But in terms of Qatar, so I'm not someone who thinks that Qatar is, the greatest enemy that we have. I think it's complicated, and I think that serious people need to take a step back and look at the pros and cons of a Qatar. And I would also recommend, I also think, because we have a major base, obviously, Al-Udeid, that we've had there for many, many years. And it's been very important in the global war on terror. It was very important for us. I think we're in a new era now, and it might be good to look at different basing. I do think that, because it does tie us to Qatar in ways that perhaps we don't want to be tied to them that as closely as we have been, potentially. But I would also say that they have been good partners to us, to the United States, in the sense that there are a lot of things that we've asked them to do that they've done. And let me just take, for example, the Taliban office in Qatar, or the Hamas office in Qatar. They were there because we asked Qatar to host them. So it's difficult to blame Qatar for allowing these terrorist organizations to have offices there when the United States asked them to have put those offices there. So the problem is us. Why did we do that? So I think blame should be placed appropriately. All of that said, Al Jazeera has been incredibly damaging to the United States and to its close partner Israel. And the Qataris for many years have said, oh, we all know it's a state-run enterprise, and they say, oh, we can't control it. They're separate from us. That's disingenuous. And obviously, in this hostage negotiation situation, which I have zero insider knowledge of, it looks complicated. It looks complicated from the outside, and it doesn't seem like it's like all efforts have been good faith. So the questioner wanted me to say that Qatar is like part of the evil nexus of Iran, and I mean, it's complicated. It's complicated. And they have been useful to the United States, and they've been useful to Israel as well. So I think we need to be honest about that and acknowledge these truths.
That's a very good point. I think we're not, people tend to say either it's against us or it's for us in all countries. And Qatar right now being in the spotlight, you see a lot of that. I do think that Qatar having announced that we couldn't use our air base in their country to attack Iran if necessary was probably a step over a line I'd like them to do. But it's a good point. You know, countries have to operate according to their own priorities and according to their own concerns. Shifting a little bit, one of the things that attracted me to your article in, excuse me, in Real Clear Defense was that it started with the French, what do they call that thing? Their defense, the defense conglomeration, whatever, and trying to cut Israel out of a French program, and to say of all the countries in the world, Iran can come, Israel can't come, and you know, so you end up with Israel being banned from the convention. Only one company, I think, and it was Leonardo of Italy, announced that they would welcome their Israeli colleagues in their booth at the convention. What happens? I know the French courts overturned the ban, and they said you couldn't exclude Israel from Eurocenter. But what happens to defense companies when they see a country like Israel, whose technology they want and whose inputs they want and whose experiences they want, cut out of a Western European program? Does that make them hesitate to work with Israel? And I'm asking about American companies and about European companies.
Yeah, so great question. I think first of all, they yes, the court reversed Macron, and it was a ban specifically by Macron. They reversed the Macron ban after the convention conference had already started. So there were a lot of Israeli companies that had, you know, bought and paid for booths and meeting rooms and facilities and hotel rooms, and they canceled all of that. And even though it was reversed, it was too late for many of these folks. Some went ahead and just went without all of their booths and all of that stuff, but it put them not only put them at a significant disadvantage that way, but like you said, really highlighted the fact that Israel is the other. Israel is other, which for people who live in the moral world, I guess I would say, was actually an encouragement to reach out to Israeli companies and Israel in general. But yes, it did hurt. It significantly hurt, and it is very difficult for Israeli companies to get traction in some markets now, because not only because of that, but because of the anti-Israel propaganda that is not reality-based, as we know, but it is quite effective. There are also people in some quarters who think that Israel is on its way to becoming a pariah state at the level of Russia, i.e., would a second Biden administration actually sanction the state of Israel? They continue to sanction individual Israelis or Israeli organizations. Another one was designated today, I believe, what they call a far right organization in Israel. So yeah, there is hesitancy. There's also hesitancy on the part of investors. You know, there's a lot of venture capital money in defense technology space, and actually people are very bullish on Israel. I joined a venture capital fund that is investing in Israeli defense tech because it's called Texas Venture Partners, because I am so bullish on the Israeli market and the Israeli the technology that's being created in the space right now. And I think it's really going to benefit Israel, but it'll also benefit the United States. And we need what they're building. We're facing the same enemies, even if we are in a period where we don't want to admit it. But it is important to note, this is, the economic war against Israel is very real, and it is effective, increasingly effective. And this is certainly one area where it is being waged, and it's important to push back against it. Also, because I don't think they're going to succeed. I think that these technical successes will speak for themselves. And as many, as many customers as these companies might lose, there are new ones that come up every day. I just earlier today, I heard a pitch from a company that is selling their technology in several European countries, Western and Eastern European. And so it's not like the door is closed, but it has become certainly more challenging.
Do you think the door is less closed, or people are less willing to cancel Israel in the defense world than, let's say, in academia or other places because of Israel's experiences and the things that it brings to the table?
I do. Absolutely. Yes, I do. And I also think it's because people in the military and defense world understand exactly what happened on October 7th and what has happened since, and how Israel is executing itself in this war. The way that they have gone so far beyond what any other country's military has ever done to protect civilian populations is well understood within military and defense communities. And I think you mentioned John Spencer from the War College, no, from West
West
Point.
Point.
And
West Point.
and he, yeah, I mean, he's traveled there many times and taught and has written and spoken extensively about chair of the Urban Studies Department at the Modern War Institute at West Point. And he has said repeatedly, we didn't protect the population like this in Mosul when we were fighting against ISIS. We killed a lot more civilians, per capita than in Mosul than Israelis have in Gaza. So I think people in the defense world understand this much better and much more clearly. And there's much less prevarication and propaganda about that than in other circles, I think.
So Spencer said something else. Not only did he talk about the extraordinary measures that Israel has taken with civilians and care of civilians in urban warfare, he actually said that Israel has set a standard for the protection of civilians in urban warfare that no one else is likely ever to meet. How's that going to affect the US as we go forward? Or the Ukrainians who are our protege at the moment, or the Taiwanese, or any other people? If it's an impossible standard, how are the rest of us supposed to react? Does the US take this seriously? There's a difference between the US government taking it seriously because they spend all their time, dumping on Israel. But when the military looks at that, and I know you have very good connections into the US military, even though you're not presently employed by the government, how does the military see that?
Yeah, I think they see it very clearly. I think what John Spencer says, I don't think is anomalous. I don't think that's an anomalous position. But I also think right now, the voices from the military side that are being amplified by our government are not saying those things. And we have to ask why that's the case, since the majority falls on the other side.
Falls on the plus side, Israel being an asset as opposed to
Falls on the strongly plus side. Israel is our ally. Israel is doing everything they can to protect the civilian population, such as it is, understanding that Hamas and Islamic Jihad don't wear military uniforms and are walking around in civilian clothes, and that hostage takers and Palestinian families in Gaza were holding Israeli hostages and maybe still are. So keeping all that in mind, they're doing they're operating under extraordinary conditions, remarkably, with also incredible. The number of casualties that the US, I think, had anticipated Israel would take once it entered Gaza was extreme. They thought Israel would take an extreme number of casualties right off the bat entering Gaza, and that there have been a lot of losses, and each loss is, tremendously painful. But they're much fewer than I think all experts had anticipated. And that's another thing that really needs to be better understood, better studied, and better understood. If I may, I saw a comment from our mutual friend Harold Rode in the Q&A, and I think he does make an excellent point about how the English language version of Al Jazeera is absolutely much different from the Arabic language version of Al Jazeera. And the Arabic language version is much more incendiary, and also not truthful. So, and it does inflame the region quite significantly. So thank you for that. I just wanted to highlight that. I didn't say that before.
So I think Harold Rode, our mutual friend, and you and I would probably agree then that Israel was correct to ban Al Jazeera reporters from certain places and certain events, because what they were doing was not reporting as journalists, but operating as spies. It seems to me Israel took a lot of very bad press.
In some cases, actual
You what?
fighters. So one wasn't one at least was an actual fighter, I believe, was actually killed by the IDF.
One at least was said to be an actual fighter, and as we know, AP quote journalists were also riding with Hamas on October 7th. And although AP in New York disavows any knowledge of the secondary employment of its freelance journalists, it's pretty clear that on the ground they were operating with Hamas, as Hamas, cheering for Hamas, whatever you want to say. So it is important to understand the role of Al Jazeera, because Israel took a lot of flack for banning what people wanted to say was a newspaper, and it isn't a newspaper. It's a propaganda arm at best and a participant at worst. So there you have it. So we have another question that comes from somebody listening. I'm happy to see that people are out there listening and that you're sending questions, so keep doing it. This is a technology question. Israel's Ballistic Missile Defense Organization, IMDO, and the US Ballistic Missile Defense Organization work very closely on things including Arrow 4, and there is a lot of technology sharing, mostly in this case from Israel to the US, although the US Army has not been using Iron Dome and other defense inventions in Israel. But what's your view on transferring Israeli technology for missile defense or other things to the United States? Are we a safe place for the transfer of somebody else's technology?
I would hope so. We have a responsibility. We have very sensitive technology ourselves, obviously, that we've developed here. And we require very strict controls over the sensitive technology that we share with our partners. So certainly a quid pro quo is not, there certainly must be an expectation and agreement that we would maintain the security of any sensitive foreign technology that we might acquire. So yeah, can we? Yes, we can, and we must.
So were you when you were in government, were you fairly confident that we were doing a good job of that?
Look, we have our nuclear arsenals, we have F-22s, we have all kinds of sensitive computer technology, for lack of a better term. I mean, there are many things that we need to keep, we need to protect. I think that's a broader question that's not really related to Israel. And I don't really want to talk about that on an open call. So
Okay,
I think it's
that's fine.
important.
You're right.
I think we have to say there's an absolute requirement, otherwise nothing matters. There's an absolute requirement to keep our sensitive technologies secret and away from the hands of our enemies. Otherwise, why bother having it at all?
I would agree. It's a much bigger question than just a Middle East question or an Israel question. Although there was some US technology in Iranian drones that ended up in Ukraine. So I think it's probably something that we need to worry about. But I also think you're right. We have the rules in place. We have to enforce the rules and ensure that our technology stays where we want it to be. So the other big friend of Israel that emerges from all of this, including in military areas, is India. And India and Israel have come together to do a lot of things. And it's a good relationship, it appears. How should the US look at that? I mean, we like India. India is a democratic country. If Israel and India deepen their security ties and their technology ties, is India a problem for the United States?
I mean, if you're looking at potential security partners for Israel, being China, Russia, or India, I would go with India. Are there problems? Yeah, they're getting close with China and Russia. And Modi certainly is what they call a Hindu nationalist. And there are real concerns. This is not the same India that I grew up with now. But it's not the CCP. They're not, I mean, from the United States perspective, there's so many reasons why Israel and India would be partners. I mean, they share the same concerns about terrorism, about regional stability, the influence of some of the adversarial states. For example, no one realizes, by the way, that Pakistan is like teetering on the edge right now. It is very likely about to be taken over by the TTP, which is a violent terrorist organization. The government is potentially gonna, I'm not trying to be alarmist, but Pakistan has been in kind of a free fall, and this is a nuclear state. Obviously, India and Pakistan are not in a full state of war, but have been in a state of conflict for a long time. So Israel and India kind of share these concerns about regional security, countering violent extremism, especially, when it comes to radical Islamic terrorism. So, in terms of the military cooperation, India is a fantastic market for Israeli defense equipment, including stuff like missile defense, drones, electronic warfare systems. India wants all of this. And like I said, is a huge market. They've been doing joint military exercises. This, in my opinion, will really only lead to more robust cooperation down the line. I mean, they've had formal, I think, at least since the early 90s, like formal and friendly diplomatic relations. So, and then, beyond the defense partnerships, there's obviously a lot of economic benefit for both countries. There's a huge amount of trade between both countries. A lot of the green stuff, water, desalination, agriculture, clean energy, all of these new developments and new technologies that Israel has created, India is able to benefit from, and Israel economically benefits from this relationship. So for all these reasons, there's a lot of mutual benefit. But, you know, there's also domestic political considerations, especially on the India side. And the further Israel, the more that Israel is maligned and kind of put in a box and made to look like a pariah state, the more challenging it will be for them to have robust public, especially defense cooperation with India and with other countries too. So, and then I would also say that they benefit, Israel's defense partners benefit so profoundly from the relationship that it's like what outweighs the other, you know, the what I would call reputational risk or the significant security benefit of the relationship. And I think clearly the security benefit outweighs right now the again what I would call reputational risk, which should not even exist. This should not even exist. It's a result of propaganda fully.
So first, let me say, I don't think it's wrong to point out that Pakistan is teetering on the edge. It's one of the things that, one of those places that the United States knows is problematic and knows has issues, and maybe we could help if we tried, but we really don't put it in the middle of our security thinking. So it is a good idea to raise it because it helps people understand that all of these things are interrelated. So I want to do one more interrelated thing before we close up here. We've talked a lot about Israeli capabilities and what Israel learns and who buys what from whom. And maybe the French actually did themselves a disservice or Macron did his country a disservice by throwing Israel out. Where are Hamas munitions and their components manufactured, and how were they transported into the Gaza Strip? We know they're not getting in right now, but take a look quickly, if you would, at the Hamas side of this equation.
Well, I think two major things were in play. Number one, Iran. So I think that the capability to build rockets and munitions factories deep underground certainly was brought by Iran. They were taught how to do that by Iran, and they were perhaps given the money for that as well. Although I think there are also other sources of funding for Hamas that came from aid organizations and that came from other things that I don't want to get into on this call. But I do also think that so that's number one. Again, you can't build rocket factories underground without significant technical knowledge. And where did that technical knowledge come from? It's certainly not it's certainly not endemic to the Gaza region. And if you know Gazans, and it didn't come from there. So so you have that, number one. Number two, there have been extensive tunnel networks identified, found, and they're still in the process of figuring out what to do with them, how to destroy them, really, under the border and the corridor between Egypt and Israel, the Philadelphia corridor. And that has been a significant discovery. And I think those are some of the tunnels where they're wide enough that two vehicles can traverse them in parallel at the same time. So that you can bring in huge amounts of materials that way over time, and many years. that these networks have been either built or in operation. So quite significant and quite distressing when it comes to not just the US-Egypt relationship, or not just, excuse me, the Israel-Egypt relationship, but the US-Egypt relationship. For, I've been a great advocate for the US-Egypt relationship. It's very important. I still believe it is important. But we also have to be honest about where we are today with that, and what level of knowledge the Egyptians had on what was going on. I think it had to have been pretty significant. I don't believe it was just a few soldiers who were just paid off to ignore these things. The
I doubt it.
network is so significant. It's notable. So anyway,
They found a 2-story tunnel, you know? Not only did they find tunnels that are wide enough for 2 cars, but they found 2-story tunnels. That's a bit of engineering that, we do that in the United States. I didn't think they were doing that in the sands of Gaza. But we do have to pay attention to it. So, Simone, we are coming to the end of our program. And regular listeners know that I like to go out on a positive note, which has become more and more difficult since October 7th. But we're going to try it anyway. If you were to, and this doesn't have to be a long answer, but if you were to look to the future and you were to say, at the end of the day, I have something positive to say about the situation, about Israel, about the region, about America, what would you say that's positive?
I actually am very long-term optimistic about the future of Israel and the future of the United States. I think short-term, we're going through some things, and it's going to take a minute. But I am watching this younger generation. I'm going to include myself in that, although I'm quickly bypassing that. I still claim it. Is really, it's an exciting time. People are building, people are have looked around and said, this is not the way that I want to live, and the direction everything is headed in is not the future that I want for myself or my family. And so it's actually very exciting to see all of these new developments, including, as I mentioned, this reindustrialization effort in the United States, and all of the exciting new defense technology that's being built in Israel that in some cases the United States has already bought or will buy and will benefit from, and what that means about the continuing long-term ties between Israel and the United States. I just don't feel, also just being involved on a personal level, being involved in the Texas Venture Partners and being a partner there, and seeing the level of interest and enthusiasm for Israeli defense tech on the part of ordinary Americans. Most of our investors aren't Jewish. They're very pro-Israel, and understand, have looked at the statistics and figures coming out of Israel. Israel has the largest number of unicorns, companies that have started from nothing and are now, public or multi-billion-dollar companies. More than any other country have come out of Israel. And so there are so many reasons to be optimistic. We just have to be honest with ourselves about where we are today, because that's where we actually start fixing things. And I don't think everyone is being totally honest about where we are and how we got here. And once we do that, then we can all be honest about what we need to do to fix it.
That's a great note on which to end. First of all, honesty is, like my mother and grandmother would have said, honesty is the best policy, right? But if you're not honest about where you are, you can't figure out where you're going to go. And the way you've just defined it, we're going to go to good places as soon as we figure out what we did wrong and admit it. So I'm going to say to you, Simone Ledeen, thank you very much for an enlightening hour.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Jewish Policy Center and the people that listened, we appreciate it, and we hope you'll come back in the future.